My connection with the Harmondsworth fire engine, it started on the 6th of March 1996. I have kept heavy horses as a hobby and horse-drawn farm implements, but only as a hobby. But in consequence of that, I had made various purchases of harness and other things from the cattle market in Reading. Now they held monthly sales of horse-drawn equipment. They used to send me the catalogue, and I was sitting down in the evening, it had been the 5th of March 1996, and I wasn't going to go to the sale the next day, and I spotted there the Harmondsworth fire engine. I was pretty surprised, and I looked up Harmondsworth in the AA book, and there is only one, and that is the one in Middlesex. By this time it was getting on about 10 o'clock at night, and I phoned up my son, who lives in Harmondsworth, farms there, and told him what the situation was. And he said, well, look Dad, you'd better go down to the sale and see if you can buy it in. So I went down to the sale the next day on the 6th of March 1996, and I was able to buy the engine in. I've had no interest whatsoever. I've never been a fireman. I knew nothing at all about fire engines, but I merely bought it in because we didn't want it to leave Harmondsworth. We eventually got it back home. We were living at Little London Nurseries in Hillingdon at that time, and we set about restoring it. We restored the pump and then the woodwork, and then we repainted the whole thing. There was extensive work had to be done because there was so much missing, and a lot of the woodwork had to be replaced because it had been just totally neglected. We had to strip the engine completely down because the pump had rusted away and quite a bit of the woodwork had gone rotten, and it had to be replaced. We were still running the nursery at Little London Nursery in Harlington Road, and so we had a yard there, and of course we had the nursery, but more particularly we had the stables. Part of the stables had existed since about 1600 or something like that, so we were able to not only accommodate the fire engine, but we were also able to stable the horses, so we'd be in a position to rehorse the engine when it was up and running again. When the engine was run down to be repainted, we found that Harmondsworth was ordinary paint, but underneath that there was gold paint. We finally got it restored, and we had one horse in it, and we took it out onto the road and gave a drive round. And one of the first events we took it down to the school fete at Harmondsworth School. This is the original drill book, and it gives the times because they carried out their drill according to the times in minutes. And they carried out the various training exercises. And in this picture we had brigades here from Acton, Uxbridge, Southall, Northwood, Heston and Isleworth, Chiswick and Harmondsworth. But this whole exercise was held here in Harmondsworth, and this photograph was taken on that day in 1913. Once we got the engine back to Harmondsworth, people came forward and said, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, my father, they were part of the Harmondsworth Fire Brigade. And it was quite amazing that even this drill book, somebody bought this and gave it to me. And somebody then came to me one day and said, oh, I don't know if you've seen this, but There's a Fire Brigade medal that's been advertised, and they say it's to do with Harmondsworth. At one point, the Harmondsworth had a steamer. There was an appeal that went out to raise the money to buy a steam engine. Now, the cost of the engine was going to be £125. And this book is the people who gave money towards it. And it's got their name and it's got the amount of money that they gave. We have the Uxbridge Gas Company. They gave 5 guineas. And the Great Western Railway Company gave 3 guineas. Miss Classen gave a guinea, and Mr. Whipham Esquire gave 2 guineas. And so it went on to raise the £125, which they must have got at the end, because we do know that they purchased a steam engine. This picture was taken in West Drayton, and obviously if you look at it you can see there's flowers that are decorated on the side, and then if you look at the house behind you can see GR. I think it must have been the coronation of King George V, about 1937 or something like that. But obviously they had there'd been a parade or something like that in West Drayton, and this photograph was taken because they're all in their best uniforms, and you can see 1 or 2 of them are World War I people because they're wearing World War I medals. In 1930, the Harmondsworth Fire Brigade and the Useley West Drayton Fire Brigade, they were merged and they were mechanised, and you can see the engine behind them. And that would have been 1930. But perhaps the interesting thing about this is that the superintendent, Mr. Samuel Bateman, became the new superintendent of the combined fire brigade, which was you would have thought that somebody from West Drayton would have become the new superintendent, or at least the Urban District Council of West Drayton would have appointed their own man, but they didn't. So Harmondsworth, I think, more or less took it over. And so there we have Samuel Bateman, and he in fact was the superintendent of Harmondsworth and then the combined brigade. He was had 37 years as the fire chief there. He started with the fire brigade, he started as a call boy in Harmondsworth, and that is when there was a fire he quickly had to go around on his bicycle, I imagine, and bang on people's doors to get them to come out and man the fire engine, because there were no telephones at that time. It was the 16th of April 1937, his funeral. Many gather to pay homage and respect to the funeral of Mr. S. Bateman. A great crowd gather, 70 firemen representing the brigades from over a wide area were among the congregation, while a large contingent was present from Useley to West Drayton Council, of which Mr. Bateman had been a valued member. So that was Mr. Bateman. Now, I was able to get about half a dozen other people, mostly living in Harmondsworth, and said we'll form a group. Now this group will be to maintain the equestrian heritage of the Horse Fire Brigade in Harmondsworth. There'd been a complete reorganisation of the London Fire Brigade at 1861, when Captain Massey Shaw has reorganised the fire brigade completely, and he'd introduced ranks, he'd introduced uniforms, he'd introduced helmets, and more importantly he had introduced training. He was very, very keen. He recruited people, very often they were ex-service people, and he favoured people from the Navy because they were used to going up and down ladders, and also they were used to heights, and so they were more easily trained as firemen. And at that time he introduced a sort of a military discipline almost. But what we tried to do, we tried to operate and to make our group in Harmondsworth very similar to what the changes that had been made. And so we got the helmets, we were able to get those, and we got uniforms, we were able to get those, and we also introduced a banner that could be carried either on the engine, or if we had outriders, could be carried by outriders. And also we adopted a motto which means always ready. The fire brigade had took part in events. The Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee of 1887. They paraded again for Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee in 1897, coronation of King George VII, 1902, coronation of George V, 1911, and then we repeated it again for the Golden Jubilee of the present Queen in 2002. The fire brigade played a very prominent part in local events, and this is a report here of the Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee from Harlington, and it says the Denbury Brass Band played an enlightening selection of music, and the Harmondsworth Fire Brigade brought up the rear of the procession, and that is quite typical of the events and reporting that the fire brigade did. And I was rather pleased when we'd restored the engine and all the rest of it. I got a letter from the Hayes and Harlington Local History Society. I must have sent them a photograph and asked them to identify the people in it, because they wrote back. The photograph of the fire engine is on page 101 and 41, but there's a slight mistake in the caption, as the name of one of the original firemen is missing. They then go on to say, I was glad to hear that the fire engine is now in safe hands and still in the district. I last saw it when it was stored in a barn at Ruislip, and I was horrified when I heard that it was up for sale and could easily have left the country. We are hoping that this year, on Armistice Sunday, we're hoping to bring the fire engine down into the village, because we want to lay one wreath this year for the fire brigade members who lost their lives in the Second World War, because although they're not military people and not on any memorial, but I think it's 327 firemen were killed during the Blitz. So we are hoping this year to have one wreath that is dedicated to those firemen. Now, can we just end on one thing? Can we end with a bit of music? As the drive past of the Harmondsworth Fire Brigade is the lass of Richmond Hill. And it's the drive past, march past that we share with the Middlesex Yeomanry, and we're very, very pleased to share it with them. Fortunately, my granddaughter's very interested in all this, and so hopefully she will keep the whole thing going. and I'm not around anymore, but